Hello, my ladies. I am so excited to be dropping this bonus podcast episode. This is an interview that I did with Matt and Katie. Matt and Katie are a couple that I found on Instagram a little while ago, a couple months ago. We started communicating, and I asked if they would come be on the podcast and tell their story. They have worked through a pornography problem in their marriage, and now Katie actually is a coach for women who have a spouse struggling with a pornography problem. I love her approach. I love what she says. I love the message. And I wanted to share their story with you because I know that so many of you appreciate having success stories, having some hope, having an idea of what it might look like to actually work through this with your spouse, how to come out on the other side. And I know that it's nice to hear Rob and I hear our story, but it's always helpful to have another perspective, another story, to hear somebody else with the same message. So it's not just me. So I'm so excited to introduce you guys to Matt and Katie. And if you guys want to go follow them on social media, their social media handle is Upward Inward Outward. Okay. And you guys are going to be hearing a lot from Katie because Katie actually is one of my business clients as well. So I am so excited to be working with her to bring their story to you guys. And I hope you enjoy, and go give them a follow. All of their resources are at the end of this episode, so that if you want to work with Katie, you can. And make sure you guys look out for Matt, who will probably be helping men in the future. So have so much fun. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this episode, this conversation with Matt and Katie. Okay, I am so excited to have on this podcast today Matt and Katie. And I don't know your last name.
Davis.
Katie
Davis.
Look at that. Matt and Katie Davis. And they are here today as my guests. And I asked them to come on because I found them on Instagram a little while ago. And I was so excited to find somebody else who was helping other people and sharing this story. And so thank you guys for coming on, because this makes me so happy to share other people's stories.
Thanks so much for having us on.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, we love your podcast. So Matt and I started a podcast like probably 2 years ago, and yours was one of the first podcasts that popped up because I'm kind of trying to do research, and so we listened to your podcast.
It was a brief podcast. We did it for like 6 months.
Yeah.
But we definitely appreciated yours and everything
Yeah.
that you do. So
I'm so glad I found you. I love what you guys are doing. Okay, so tell my listeners, I want them to hear your story. However you guys want to tell it. I don't know who tells stories better. I tell stories better than Rob. So usually when we tell stories, I'm the one that tells it. I don't know which one of you guys is better at telling stories, but I would love to hear your story. How did all this come about?
Okay, perfect.
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I have struggled with pornography for most of my life. And
Okay.
I was first exposed to it when I was like 6 years old, super young. And I was viewing it like regularly by the time I was 11 or 12.
Okay.
And I just viewed in complete isolation. Totally, I didn't tell anyone well through like my teens until like my junior year of high school, when I finally like told my parents, told some like church leaders, got like a counselor, got some help, and was able to serve like a 2-year church mission. And so during that time, I didn't have any exposure to pornography. I was kind of away from it. It was a really nice time for me. But within 2 months of being home, I fell right back into it. And
Yeah.
I had like a phone back, I had technology, and I tripped right back into it. And that was actually the same time that Katie and I had just started dating. So I got home from that mission, Katie and I started dating, and I was falling back into it right as we were starting to get engaged.
Mm.
And ultimately we got married like that, where I didn't tell Katie anything about my pornography struggles. And I was viewing it regularly, several times a week, just really struggling. And Katie had no idea. And that's how we got married.
Yeah, well, and so to back up a little bit, we actually met on our mission, which is kind of fun. So we
Oh, how
served in
fun.
Albania. Yeah. So
Wow.
we knew each other, and that's kind of why. So I came home a year before him.
Okay.
And we wrote each other just casually. I was dating people, but when he got home, we kind of started dating really quickly, and things progressed quickly because we already knew each other. And
Right.
so, but yeah, so during that time, Matt had been struggling with his pornography use, right? And so as a woman, and kind of like in our church culture, is kind of like, oh, this is something that you should talk about before you get engaged, or like while you're dating, to kind of decide like if this is something that you want to pursue or not, right?
Mhm.
And so I kind of knew I needed to have the pornography conversation with Matt, but I was really uneducated about pornography, right? Like
Sure.
a lot of women are when they're
Yeah.
that young, I had no experience with it myself. And so I kind of went in, I kind of just started asking him like, super vague questions like,
Yeah.
have you struggled with this, or like, what's your history, and so he kind of told me like a nicer version of the story. He was like, yeah, I struggled, but I'm good now. I'm not struggling. But he was lying to me at that time. In his mind, he was kind of like, I'll tell her once I get things handled,
Have
or
a
like,
few months
Yes.
of like
right.
sobriety, I'm away
Yeah.
from it, have it
My
figured
husband,
out.
okay.
Exactly.
My husband had that same thought.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I like missed a lesson in church or something, but I was never told like, hey, you should have this conversation before you get married. I'm probably just older than you by that much. Like it was just like not that I don't recall that. Maybe it could have totally happened and I don't remember, but I do not remember anybody ever saying like, hey, you should talk about it before you get married. And so it didn't even occur to me. It didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah, because why would it?
Yeah, and I had nobody in my family that like I had no personal experience with this being a problem in any other relationship I'd ever been in. And so it was not something that I even thought to ask. And then, and very similar to you, like Rob didn't tell me about it. He was watching it several times a week for years until we had our first baby. And that was his thought too, was like, oh, I'll tell her when I get a handle on it. I think that's so fascinating. It's like, no, I need to get this under control first, which I totally understand. Like all of the emotional, like all the guilt and the shame and everything, you feel like you want to not have that. You're like, oh no, I want to get this handled before I bring it up, because he knew, his thought was like, he knew it was going to hurt me. And so he didn't want to hurt my feelings, which is so lovely of him. Right. But lying in the meantime wasn't awesome. But I just think that's fascinating that you guys had similar thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like super common. Like for me, it was like a perfectionist thing. Like I didn't want Katie to see my weaknesses. I didn't want her to get hurt like by what I was doing. And it's just like in your mind, it's crazy. It's insanity, but you think you're going to solve it when you just like haven't been able to figure it out. And you think you'll be able to do it alone. And that's the opposite of what you need, really.
For sure. 100%. Okay. So you got married. So Katie,
and
he was lying. So how'd you find out?
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of like throughout our marriage, I was kind of like, oh, he struggled with this in the past. I'll like check in with him. Like every once in a while, I was like, how you doing? You find, just super big questions, right? Like I'm being helpful. And he's like, I'm good. Just really easily like, no, I'm not struggling. I was just kind of asking yes, no questions. And for some reason, like, so it was the night before our first anniversary that I was like feeling, well, a couple weeks before that, for some reason, I was kind of starting to feel like promptings or intuition saying like, there's something off. I need to talk to Matt about something. I don't know, just something felt off, but I didn't know what it was. And we were laying in bed the night before our first anniversary. We were talking about like our life and our marriage and stuff. And I got a really strong impression that I needed to ask Matt about pornography. And I was like, whoa, that was like really scary. Like, I do not like that thought. I don't want to know where this is going, but I just, it was so strong. I needed to ask him. And so I started to ask him, but I started to really dig into it. And I was like, when was the last time you looked at pornography? When was the last time you masturbated? When was the last time, whatever. And I'm asking him very specific things. And then he started like quickly disclosing everything to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that this was going on. He was like, yeah, I watched it like 2 days ago, and I'm like, what?
Where was I? What?
Yeah, like what's going on? So he told me he'd been lying to me the whole year of our marriage. And while we were dating and while we were engaged. And I'm sure the feelings. I was devastated. I was just like, it just felt like the entire year of our marriage was invalid, or there was just like a dark cloud over it. It was just a really terrible feeling. And that was such a difficult time for the two of us. And we were really young in our marriage too, and I remember like one of the first things that I thought was like, oh my gosh, are we going to get a divorce? Like that's all I ever knew about pornography use. The only stories I ever heard people talk about were things like, oh yeah, my cousin's husband watched porn and they got divorced or whatever, just like these horror stories.
Right.
So in my mind, I was like, that's where we're headed. Like, this is what that means, And again, I was uneducated about what that meant.
For sure.
And then, so like most women or any good wife, I had great intentions, but I'm like, okay, Matt, like, here's your list of all the things that
here's all the things we're going to do.
Exactly. I was like, I'm so helpful. You need to talk to the bishop. You need to talk to my parents and get a priesthood blessing. And like, here, like, we're going to the 12-step program, like just piling on all of these things. And he was a good sport about it, but you know, like,
Yeah,
how are you feeling
I
about
wish
that?
that I could say that things got better from there, and that was the
Right.
last time Katie had to find out. But it was basically the next year I spent continuing to lie to her, continuing to view pornography,
Mhm.
continuing to
And we
struggle.
were doing the things, right? Like we
Right.
were going to the 12-step program. We
Right.
were checking in with each other. We were like, I thought things were going well. And I was
Right.
like, oh, that was pretty easy. That wasn't like too big of a
Ah,
deal.
whew,
You know?
we're good. The
Exactly.
test.
Exactly. So we were doing lots of things and I was just like, oh, I'm so glad we're done with that. Put it behind
Right.
us. Don't have to think about it again, kind of thing.
Yeah. And like I would disclose sometimes I'd say, hey, like I had a slip up last night or something, but it was like I had 10 or 12 before that, and then I would disclose one, and then
Yes.
I'd tell her another one. And
Yeah.
it was, and then like I was even lying, like at 12-step meetings, I would go and say, today's day like 150 for me, it was like day 2 or day like 3 or
Uh-huh.
something. And so I was really stuck in just again like that lying because I wanted like like the to for my life to be perfect, for everything to be perfect around me. I wanted to control like Katie and
Yeah.
everything. So I couldn't break away from like that dishonesty, and I also just couldn't break away from like my pornography use. Like it was helping me cope and deal with life, or at least I
Yes.
thought that it was.
Yes.
And so it went on that way for about another year after that
Uh-huh.
happened. And again, Katie thought things were going well, but they weren't.
And then randomly, I was driving home one night, not even thinking about this. I thought things were going super well. And randomly, a thought came into my mind. You need to go home and talk to Matt about pornography.
Okay, can we
He's
just
lying to
pause
you.
and like admire the intuition or the spiritual connection that you have going on? Because not once in my marriage did I ever get that thought. And maybe God tried really hard to tell me, and I it was
Yeah.
not available. Was probably
Yeah.
probably accurate, but like I never once had that thought or question. So I am
It's
just
so interesting how it's just different for every woman, you know, like,
so different, but like I'm just very impressed. Not only
well,
that
thank
you
you.
like
And
heard
like,
it, but then you also did it.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. The thing is, like, I generally don't have distinct impressions like that. You know, like those are
Sure.
probably like only a couple of like the dozen that I've had where it was just like really distinct, you know. So
Yeah.
it was surprising to me. And this is always a story I tell for the women that I work with because during that time I had so much paranoia, I had so much
Yes.
anxiety. So I was
Yes.
always having these trauma responses.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, I need to talk to Matt, or like there's
Uh-huh.
something going on, right? But this just felt completely different. It
Different.
was just like it was a knowing, you know, it was an
100%.
intuition. And I was able to distinguish that in that moment, which wasn't always the case for me,
Right.
right? So anyway, so I went home and I looked Matt in the eye and I was like, you're lying to me again. What's going on? And he just broke down and
Yeah,
tell what happened.
well, it just for me, like you, I was really impressed that like she had kind of heard like God speaking to her and come and talk to me. And she like at that moment I knew that I couldn't lie to Katie anymore because she had a connection with someone who did know what was going on.
Yeah. She was man, she's in line with Jesus and Jesus is on her side, you know?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
like just for me in that moment. I was like, I cannot lie because God knows that I'm lying, and like I can keep things between him and me, but now like he's brought Katie into the picture, and it's not going to work for me to lie.
Yeah.
And that was a really hard time because again, I had just broken trust like repeatedly in our marriage.
Right.
And it's like one time, that's like okay, like we can work through this, but like another time, and
Mhm.
obviously repeated times in that gap. And so it was a period of me disclosing everything that happened, getting
Right.
fully up to speed with Katie. But one really amazing thing that happened that day was that was the very last time I've ever lied to Katie about anything for like any extended period of time. Like I have disclosed everything to her within 24 hours since that event happened. And that
Wow.
has been probably the single biggest thing that has helped my recovery. Not just like confession with Katie, but the fact that I have learned to live a life of integrity. And
Yes.
I definitely owe so much of that to like Katie helping me get there, helping me realize that. But that integrity has been key to my sobriety, my
I
recovery.
love that. I love that. I feel like again, because it didn't force it. Like take ownership of that for yourself because it's super impressive. Because in order to have integrity with another person, you first have to have integrity with yourself. And it's hard to admit the things that you don't even like to another person that you don't even want to admit to yourself, right? Especially the person who you don't want to hurt and you know that it hurts. That's so hard. I'm just very impressed by that. And if we could rewind for just a second, I have such a, I would love to hear a little more details if you're willing, if not totally fine, of like how this happened. Like you said, you were exposed to it first at the age of 6, but then you started, like you were watching it routinely by the age of 11, but your parents had no idea?
Yeah. And yeah, that's a good question. So age of 6 was completely, I don't really believe that it was anyone's fault. But I just like happened upon it
Wow.
and saw it. And like it was just like a one-time exposure. And but I do remember that distinctly. And I remember like that feeling and how it was like at such a young age.
Yeah.
Right. And then fast forward to when I was like 11 years old, I got like an iPod Touch for the first time, you know, something that had access to the internet. And again, like you know, like you asked, like my parents didn't know. It was just like I was the first generation of kids to have the internet.
Internet.
Hand,
I know.
Right? Not just
our parents
computer.
were not prepared. They were not.
Exactly.
No.
And I think our generation hopefully is going to do better. Every generation has done, I think, a little bit better.
Agreed.
But that was just like untethered access to like the internet, right? And that's like as an 11-year-old, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, even like just as a teenager, like that's dangerous because your brain doesn't know how to contextualize what you're seeing on the phone. Like right now, I'm like able to look at that and say, this is what this is what that isn't, and like put it in its place. But as an 11-year-old, you see that and you're feeling things and you're just running off of emotion and like how it makes you feel. And pretty soon you start using that as a coping mechanism to get through life, to get through things. And yeah, so I hid that from everyone in my life for 4 or 5 years before anyone found out.
Wow. And then fast forward, now you're married, and now you then are telling Katie all of the things. How did that go? Katie, what was that like for you, for him to all of a sudden start telling? Obviously you're like, I'm really grateful that you're now being honest, but like, holy cow, here's a whole flood of stuff I wasn't prepared for. Or maybe you were like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, no, it was honestly just really devastating and really heartbreaking. Matt is an amazing man and was and is an amazing husband. And so it was really hard for me to like wrap my brain around that he was lying to me, that he's using pornography use, he's acting out in these like inappropriate ways that we didn't feel like aligned with our core values in our marriage. And that was so alarming to me, like kind of like you saying, like I couldn't even put it in a place. And so much of that has to do because I was uneducated about porn use, but I was making it about him and like his core identity. 100%. Right? And I was just like, it's such you're a liar. Like, you're, you know, like all these things.
Yes. Well, because we have such a hard time reconciling the two different people, right? It's almost easier in our brains to separate them. It's like, oh, there's the man I thought he was, and this guy's different. It's almost easier to separate them because then we don't have to deal with the conflicting emotions about it. Like rather than having to deal with, oh, I love this man and I also hate what he's doing, we can just like put it off and we can just say, oh, I just like really, he's just not who I thought he was. Everything is a lie. And we kind of tell ourselves this story, but we have to reconcile in order to move forward. We have to bring that back together, but it's so hard to do.
Exactly. It is so hard. And I just, as his wife, I felt so ashamed of like what he was going through, and more than anything, just about like the dishonesty. And I was really making that something mean something about me, right? Like, how could I marry a man who's doing this, or how, why is he doing this? It must be my fault or whatever, you know? And so I was also personally suffering, and I was just like deep in emotional turmoil over this, because I just couldn't understand what was going on with him. I had so much fear, so much anxiety. And that moment that I found out, days after, months after, it was so difficult to get through those times. And I just felt like I wasn't even able to like continue to function in my life because I was so wrapped up in everything that was going on with him and trying to fix it, trying to rescue him, you know, all those things.
So were you going to the 12-step program as well? Were you talking to somebody about this or just him?
Yes, I was. We didn't start going to the 12-step program. It was probably like maybe like 6 months in or something. So we didn't start like immediately, if I remember right. but going to the 12-step program, so we actually were going to a joint program, which
Okay.
was amazing. So men and women, husbands and wives or couples were there. And it was actually so incredible to see these other couples who were going through the same thing,
Yeah.
because
So
before
powerful.
that, I truly believed that like we were the only ones.
Yeah,
struggling.
we were it. That was it.
Yeah,
There were no other people.
exactly.
Yes.
I had no idea. I didn't talk to a soul about it before that,
Yes.
and I just felt like we were the only people in our ward or in our state
Mhm.
struggling. And so going to those meetings was just so empowering. And I feel like that's really where I started to make some changes. And I started to I started to get educated about his problems, and I started to get educated about my problems and how I
Yeah.
needed to take charge of my own healing, instead of trying to fix him.
So what did that look like for you? Like taking charge of your own healing? Was that something you did through therapy or a counselor? Did you figure it out on your own or just through the 12 steps? How'd you do it?
Yeah, so I would say like that first year, I was going to the meetings, but I wasn't necessarily applying what I learned. I
Sure.
was getting educated about him and about me, but I still had this feeling of just like, okay, I can power through this. I don't really need this stuff. We're just fine, because I thought Matt was doing better, so
Right.
I was just kind of like, we're fine. So it wasn't until the second time that I found out that was kind of my rock bottom. You know how they say rock
Yes.
bottom for the addict, it was kind
No,
of my
the
rock
wives need it
bottom.
too. We all have a rock
Exactly.
bottom.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I feel like in that moment, I gained a new perspective that, okay, whatever we were doing that I thought we were doing actually isn't working. We were
Right.
doing all the things and it didn't work. I could
Yeah.
not control him. I could not manage his recovery. It was exhausting. It was hard for both of us in our marriage. It just was not working. And so I feel like that second time around, I really started digging into the 12 steps or like the spouse and family support guide, which
Yeah.
I absolutely love. I started connecting with other women. I did go to therapy. I started gathering some resources. There weren't a lot of resources, unfortunately. And
right?
I felt really alone. I
Yeah.
just like, there were some resources, but they weren't necessarily like Christian specific,
Uh-huh.
so I felt like I was just kind of stuck almost. And so I kind of just had to grind through and figure out what worked for me, so it was a little bit of everything. But with time and like with practice, I started, setting boundaries. I started working on my own recovery. I started separating myself from Matt and not going on that roller coaster with him with all the ups
Right.
and downs, so
Mhm.
it took time, and it wasn't just like an overnight thing, and there's still
Right.
things that I am recovering from today. It's not just you're done one day and you're like, oh, I'm fine now.
Yeah, here's your
It's
certificate.
like
You passed. Right.
exactly. Yeah, it's just an ongoing process. And so it takes time, and it takes communication with your spouse, and it takes just consistent perseverance. Like in my
Yeah.
case, there were so many times where I was just like, oh, things are going better. I'm good. I don't need this
Yes.
anymore. I don't need to go to the meetings anymore. I don't
Uh-huh.
need therapy anymore. 2 weeks later or 1 week later, I'm like, oh dang, like things are bad again.
Yes.
Things are bad with him. And I'm like, oh, now things are bad with me. So
Yes.
I just had to realize it just needed to be consistent. Like this is something I'm always going to be working through and healing from.
I love that. I love that idea because I think, again, it is sometimes we want it to be like losing weight. It's like, oh my gosh, I really want to lose 10 pounds. And it's like, okay, I just feel like it's me getting to the point where I'm like, okay, step on the scale. Congrats, I've lost 10 pounds. But it's like, oh, but in order to maintain this, I have to like actually keep doing things. It's not just
Right,
about like the initial, okay, I'm surviving now. It's like, no, this is something that like keeping our emotional health a priority is always something that takes focused intentional effort.
Exactly.
Otherwise it's like very easy to just put it on the back burner. But when we do that, that's when all the old patterns come up. Everything runs on, autopilot. Our brains are just kind of going amok. And that's when we're like, what is the matter? And it's like, oh yeah, I haven't been taking care of myself emotionally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like for you, Matt? What was like your healing journey? So you started with the 12 steps. Is that predominantly what you stayed with, or was there another thing that you did?
I feel like that did help me get most of my initial recovery. And I will say like the power in the 12 steps for me came from the program. Like the 12 steps alone they're fantastic, but it was the community that I gained,
Yeah.
The accountability that I had from like, if someone just goes to 12 step meetings, they're going to learn about things, but they're not going to like get the true value. And that is like, you have to like put yourself out there and like work.
Right.
And for me, that was like reaching out and like eventually getting someone to sponsor me. That was really scary for me, really hard, but it was huge because it was someone who had like could kind of coach me
Right.
regularly, and I was reaching out to him every day, stuff like that. So that community that I found and like the accountability through the 12-step program was huge for me. We did, like Katie mentioned, like we both kind of did therapy, and we did like couples therapy
And life coaching.
Well, I was gonna get to that.
Oh, okay.
The therapy at first, it was useful. I don't feel like I was like cracked open at that point. I
Yeah.
feel like I was still just kind of like struggling. But I do feel like as I like was in my recovery and just kind of like finding like months of sobriety up to like a year, then we started doing some life coaching, and that was like a huge game changer for me, just because I started seeing like patterns in my life, and I started seeing places where I was like distorted and things that were like incongruent in my life.
Right.
And that really gave me tools, and also it helped me see like a vision of like I can not only like overcome pornography use, but I can become like the best man, the best husband, the best father, and learn how to like be everything that I'm supposed to be. And the principles that help me do that also help me maintain my sobriety. And then if I could just add one other thing, that is it is step 12 in the 12 steps, but it's like service and like sharing my message, sharing the message of like hope and helping other people recover. That has helped me maintain sobriety better than anything. And like Katie said, we've done like a podcast, and now we're on Instagram every day talking about this, and always just like helping other people. And that has helped me more than almost anything. And I feel like not everyone has to go on Instagram and talk about that.
Right.
But if you can get out there and like share some of the light that you've gained, that is like immensely helpful.
I love that. I think that's so powerful because, again, when we get stuck in, it breaks up the shame, right? Oftentimes with pornography, the secret becomes bigger than the actual problem itself, right? It's like maintaining the secret. And then the shame on top of that just makes it this thing that we feel like we almost can't get out of it. And when you start to shine a light on it, whatever that looks like, again, you don't have to go on Instagram and share it. People don't have to start a podcast. That's not like the only thing. But the more you talk about it, the more you acknowledge it and get it out in the open, the less power it has over you, the less it lessens the shame, right? And when we start to lessen the shame and we start to shine a light on it, we realize not how small as in insignificant it was, but how powerless it can be. It only has as much power as we give it. So the more we stay secretive about it, the more power we give it, because we self-isolate and we pound on the shame and all of those things, which just perpetuates it, right? I think it's so beautiful what you guys are doing, all the sharing that you're doing. So let's have this segue right into it. How do people find you? And do you both coach, or do just one? Are you both? Katie, you have a program.
Yep.
Matt,
so I have a program. Okay. And
I don't have a program, but we both do coaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So Matt, you coach the men. Katie, you coach the women.
Exactly.
Yep. So right now, so I launched my course last April, and my course is called Becoming Whole After Betrayal, and it's for women who are affected by pornography use or their spouse's behavior, addiction, whatever you want to call it. And that has just been so life-changing to me, kind of like what Matt was saying, to really just have a platform to work with women who are struggling with this, because years ago I was looking and searching high and low. I was desperate to talk to somebody or to get help from somebody. And I'm really hoping that my program can be that for other women who are in the same situation. And so I've built this community of women. I'm so proud of all of them, and I just love each of them so much. So I do online, it's like an online course portion, and then I do coaching calls twice a month, and some other things are in that as well. And then we do our Instagram, and that's where you can find my course, or you can find it.
And our Instagram is called Upward, Inward, Outward. That's the
handle. Okay, tell me about your Instagram name.
Upward, Inward, Outward. Yes. Well,
no one can say it. No one can remember it.
People do try.
We love it.
But it's like our process that we found for healing for both of us, and it's turning upward to God and like finding His light, finding His strength, His ability to change us. And then changing like inwardly and fixing ourselves from the inside out, and then shining our light and helping others. And also just finding like connection is such a powerful tool, both for like addiction and compulsive behaviors, and as well as like people dealing with trauma. Like that connection is so powerful. So that's our process of going upward, inward, and outward.
I love it. Yep. And then Matt, so you coach men as well, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You do one-on-one coaching.
I do one-on-one
right now.
coaching with men.
Mhm.
No program right now. We have some things in the works, hopefully that will launch soon. As well as we have like a 14-day couples like revive your marriage coming out soon.
Oh, I love
the
it.
next month or so. So that we're excited about that. And
And we also have free resources on our page as well.
Great, but
So we
people
have
should pay
free-
you. So I'm so excited
Right.
to send people to you
Yes.
because I have so many women that come to me all the time and they're like, is Rob still coaching? Rob coached for a little bit and I was like, no, he's not. And I'm always looking for men for my ladies' husbands and also ladies because I
Oh.
love to be the coach for everybody. But let's be honest, there's like so many women that need all the help and I can't coach everybody. And I don't resonate with everybody. I am not everybody's cup of tea. I am happy to say that. And that is totally fine. And I love your approach. So anybody listening who resonates with Katie, go follow her, join her program. You can pass along the information about Matt's program, Upward, Inward, Outward. I'm so excited.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to add?
I think that's about it. Well, thank you so much for getting our message out and like helping us share. We just, more than anything, when we started all this, when we started our podcast a couple of years ago, we started our Instagram, more than anything, we just want couples to know that there is hope.
Yeah.
And that you don't have to end in divorce if you don't want to. You know, that's
100%.
not everybody's fate. And you don't have to be in an unhappy relationship that if you don't want to. You know, there is hope for healing for both of you. And again, it's not going to come overnight. It's not going to be like a quick fix or something, but through God, through connection with others, and through working together, you can find hope.
I love that. I love that. Well, thanks for coming on, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay.